All right. Last video was about how I basically piggyback on my grandfather's and father's existence in order to highlight my own thoughts, because I feel like just me saying them alone discredits them. So I basically use other people's credibility for it. The end of it was kind of cute because we tend to do that, or at the very least, when we're looking for evidence, we're removing ourselves from our equation. And I think that's where bias kind of kicks in because when you're looking for evidence, then you're not really trusting what exactly you're thinking about and not processing it yourself through how you see the world. And what happens is it fucks with your reality because then it encompasses the other people's like ex experience, no, other people's explanation of reality in order to fit the mold. And ultimately, you lose that genuinity and authenticity that you have. It's a good start, right? But today's video is monster evolves to warrior, then the hero, then to the hero, then to the sage. All right, here. I have been writing a book just for the fun of it, right? I have I have a full determination to actually like write it and kind of like talk to somebody to edit it and like type it and fully kind of create that story. I have that determination. I'm just not doing it as a job. I literally do a page a day. And let's just say it's become there are literally like I think about 1,000 something pages with it, which is fun, but it's fine because the pages are like this big, right? So a page, 2 pages a day, this big. It's not A4. I think this is A5. Yeah. But anyways, uh, my reasoning is the monster evolves to warrior, to hero, then to sage. I'm gonna go back to a Blaise Pascal once said this, or I think maybe it's one of like Socrates' disciples or the disciples of the disciples. And the idea is this: man is a being between the beast and the seer, which means he could either be a demon or a god. And if you look at our not consciousness, conscious behavior, when you lose your temper, for example, like we say, lose our temper, right? But that is us acting on emotion, which is a very primitive approach, very beast-like. Remember, we're mammals. I'm sorry. Like, we probably, whatever the evolutionary theory is, we are classified as mammals. Like we have the same characteristics, just different DNA. And so the idea is like in our progress, if you look at our history, we kind of like shed primitive behavior and kind of like shed it in a systematic way. Like at first, we were kind of like just rampaging randomly, as I think like the closest thing to a human being is a Homo sapien, or like there are different kinds of like Homo something, like a Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, and they're like basically the ones in Asia, and there were ones in Latin America. There were like different humanoids basically, and those are the oldest form of like culture slash civilization. Because what happens is basically when we evolve to a certain way, we start cooperating with each other. So we're no longer monstrous or monster oriented. We're no longer as primitive in our approach. And then we become a bit more like tribal, and tribal kind of screams warrior. And then from there, we kind of like started developing more of a cultural thing. And then honor came into place, or just kind of like the creed or the cause or like the crew, the group, whatever it is, the tribe. All of them started coming into place. And ultimately, like fighting or our primitive nature started being attached to something bigger, a cause, basically, the safety of our people. And like, naturally, like human nature tends to kind of like destroy. Well, I believe, I believe in a previous video I stated that belief kind of goes through. I see human nature to always lean towards destruction. And it's because in order for us to find balance, we kind of have to go to an extreme. And then when we go to an extreme, we go, "Look, okay, we can't be doing this." And initially, like going back to this, is because like we started from a primitive perspective, like a monster activity perspective, how we consciously think. Our cognitive approach was primitive, and then after that was more like tribal slash warrior-ish, and then after that was more like heroic conquests and all that shit. And then throughout, you kind of like start seeing these seers, these sages, like the people that kind of like transcend beyond. Like we were scattered and then we grouped, and through the grouping, we kind of like evolved. And in a way, like the people that evolved further kind of separated from the group, right? So in a way, the group was an extreme from the side of like us being way too primitive. Like it was a necessary extreme for us to kind of like evolve from our primitive behaviors. But then at one point, that also became an extreme that we evolved away from, right? This is just like funny. And if you were to consider that, you could also consider that if enough people are wise enough to kind of like isolate, then them actually finding a way to communicate together would be a progression of our evolution and would allow us to kind of like explore humanity differently. But that's just the thought that I that came to me right now. So the idea is what? The idea is within us lies the primitive nature. Within us lies the ego, which is basically the warrior. I shall protect, I shall do, I shall accomplish, I shall build, I shall succeed, I shall win, all that kind of stuff, right? It's very heroic in nature. But also within us kind of lies the community segment, which is I'm doing this for the cause, the heroic segments, right? There's the I will fight this until I make it happen. These are all trains of thought that kind of happen, and whoever's listening to this video, like just listen to when you're in an awkward state of aggression, like maybe just troubled thoughts. You see a battle happening, and that's what I'm talking about, right? Because like if you didn't have these thoughts, then you'd be very primitive and just following your emotions. And a lot of people are like that as well, kind of civilized like that, or that's when we call uncivilized, I guess. I'm not sure. But the idea is basically our our existence is kind of like built within these four realms, and effectively we can slip to each one of them at any given point, depending on the situation. When you're sitting and watching the ocean or watching a sunset, nobody can deny there's that kind of like, and the Japanese call it yugen, which is a real, it's like an epiphany, but a realization of how small you are. It's like that's the feeling, right? It's the same thing that you get when you're kind of like biting into an apple, and it kind of like the sweetness of the apple kind of like bursts in your head, or like just eating something when you haven't eaten in like 3 days, and it's just the flavor kind of kind of shocks you, and you're like that kind of feeling. I don't know if I expressed it properly, but we have these four like within us. And sometimes we're very aggressive, primitive, or passive, and like kind of like again like all it depends on how you see yourself, I guess, or the situation, if it's fight, flight, or like freeze. And then at times you find yourself kind of like fighting and wanting to fight, and at times you find yourself initiating the fight. for some reason you're fighting to get a promotion. You're fighting for your family to see you differently. All of these are kind of like, right? They're kind of, they're still within, I guess, the realm of how you're reflecting on yourself. And at times where you just don't give a fuck. And that's kind of like a sagey attitude. And I feel like these are basically compartmentalizations of our mind. And when I say here monsters evolve to warriors and then to heroes and then to sage, because I feel like we start with a whole lot of just like emotional compartmentalization. The rest is not there yet, especially as children, right? Because if you look at children, they're very much how I feel, that's what's going to come out. And that's primitive behavior. It's kind of like them feeling a bit too that still monsters. And then as they grow, they kind of like develop ways to communicate better and handle their emotions. And they normally do that by challenges and by like fighting and by like a competitive nature in order for them to kind of like organize themselves and kind of like have a drive, have a point to get to. And then after that, they start seeing their own accomplishments and what I would want to do in this world. And then that's the hero's journey kind of kicks in. And almost every single person you meet after a certain age, all their advice is don't give a fuck. Nobody gives a fuck. Don't give a fuck. Which is basically the saginess of it. And I feel that our evolution is basically the compartmentalization of these four aspects of us and kind of like shifting from like shifting energy from one of them to the other. Why the fuck not? It's a video. Love you.